Good evening, my fellow Pastafarians. This is Chemo Creepypastas, and I'm going to be bringing you an original, brand new, you've never seen it before, anywhere, creepypasta every week. And this week, we're going to start off this show with a story called Do Not Read This, written by yours truly. I swear to you when I tell you this, I am not insane. Everything I'm about to say to you is true. It started 2 weeks ago. I was reading some creepypastas online, really no different than most nights I'm craving that unsettled feeling. Now, usually I'd rather read the classics, like Slender Man and The Rake, but that night something new caught my eye. It was a story titled, Do Not Read This, and of course, just like Pandora and her box, curiosity got the best of me. I ignored the title of the story and clicked on it. My screen flickered for a second and a new page was brought up. It looked the same as any other creepypasta I'd read before. But as I started to read it, I noticed it just didn't seem to read right. It had many grammatical mistakes, and simple words were spelt wrong, like red, for example, being spelt as red, like the color. Despite the oddity of the story, I read on. Now, I promise I won't bore you with the small details, but I can summarize it like this. It was a story about a kid, and based on the writing, I assumed a young one at that, named Jeremy. The story talked about how Jeremy had been abused by his father, who was a raging alcoholic, and his mother, who was so scared of his father that she would do anything he said without question. The story went on to explain that Jeremy had no friends in school. Though it never said his grade, it did say that all the kids made fun of him because of the way he would always come to school in ripped and dirty clothes that barely fit him. Because of his being a social pariah, Jeremy, upon returning home from school every day, would lock himself in his room and surf the internet. In the story, Jeremy found a place online that had helped him embrace his loneliness. Jeremy had found Creepypasta. Days he spent feverishly reading stories of entities murdering innocent people. At this point, I was so entranced by this supposedly true story that I jumped when my mother flicked on the lights to my bedroom. We had a quick exchange of words before we wished each other good night, and she left, turning the lights off as she did. I eagerly returned to the story. It said Jeremy had read almost all of the old stories and was instantly hooked. Every day after school, he immediately ran upstairs and into his room, locking his door as he went. Then one day he came across a story titled, Do Not Read This. And just like I did, he read it anyways. At this point, I started questioning the author's originality, when I realized that he'd said he'd read a story with the exact same title as the one he had written. But despite my mildly OCD thought, I continued. When all of a sudden my computer shut off, I jumped and then laughed as I looked by my feet, where my cat laid with the power cord in his mouth. The bastard had pulled the cord out again. I laughed at the moment of fright I had felt, and then took the cord from his mouth and plugged it back in, shooing the cat away as I did so. I quickly rebooted the computer and opened my browser. I returned to Creepypasta and tried to find the Do Not Read This story again. I searched through what felt like the entire website and found nothing. Suddenly it occurred to me to check my browsing history, but like on Creepypasta, the story was gone. There was not even a sign that it ever existed. All of my other history was there, just not that story. I thought that was odd, but nothing more, and continued to read other scary stories for an hour or so, before going to bed around 11:30. I woke up in a cold sweat. I figured it must have been the nightmare I'd been having. I don't quite remember all the finer details, but I do remember a face. Oh, dear Lord, it was a face that was permanently burnt into my mind. The face belonged to a young boy. At least, I think it was a boy. But his eyes had no pupils, almost as if he had rolled them all the way back into his head. He was also drooling, but not saliva. He was drooling blood. Then the boy raised his hands to his face and started to cry. I remember being overwhelmed with sadness at this point, and I just wanted to help him, so I put my hands on his shoulder to comfort him. And when he looked at me, his face had changed. Instead of pure white eyes, the kid had no eyes at all, just empty sockets that stared. And then they started to bleed, and the blood trailed down the boy's face like tears. Then the boy started to smile, and as he smiled, his mouth got bigger and bigger, until it took up his whole face. Then it opened to reveal razor-sharp teeth, and as he lunged, I woke up. Now, as I said, I originally thought that this was what woke me up, but that turned out not to be the case, because from down the hall I heard a voice. No more than a whisper, but still audible. I slowly got out of my bed and put on my slippers and robe. I opened the door as slow as I could, trying not to wake anyone in the house, but failed miserably, as the door let out a mighty shriek that made even me wince. I tried to creep down the hall, towards where I heard the voice last. When I reached the end of the hall, I stopped and listened, and for a few seconds, I heard nothing. Then all of a sudden, I heard another whisper, but this time it called out my name. That sent a shiver down my spine. Still, onwards towards the noise I went. That's when I realized that the voices were now coming from my room, and to make it even more odd, there seemed to be some kind of light on, but I knew for a fact that I'd turned everything off before I went to sleep. Regardless, I tiptoed down the hall and back to my room. As I looked in, I saw that my computer was on. I reached for the off button, but as I did, the mouse pointer started to move on its own. It first went to start and then proceeded to open up my Paint program. I stared in awe as my computer alone started to write out, "All you had to do was open it." It was written on the screen in a red that matched blood all too closely for me. I quickly reached down and yanked the plug out of the socket. The computer died and I let out a sigh. I laid in bed for about an hour after that, still up and still shaking. At first I figured out it must have been still half asleep, but the more I thought about it, the more I started to realize it really had happened. But what did it mean? And why was it so similar to the spelling mistakes in Do Not Read This? I really tried to sleep after the event, but just couldn't bring myself to, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face. That goddamn fucking face. Empty eye sockets slowly being replaced by that smile. All those teeth. And bang! I'd shoot straight up in bed, with every hair on end, my skin ravaged with goosebumps. After hours of laying in bed, the sun started to peek through the blinds, and I got up and got dressed for the day. I tried to shake off the events of the night before, but no matter what I did, that face was always at the back of my mind. The thing I found most odd is that I associated the nightmare, specifically that face, with the events involving the computer that happened after. And even more peculiar was the fact that I had associated all of these incidences with Jeremy and the Do Not Read This story. My day wasn't anything unusual after that. I went to work serving customers at McDonald's, and at the end of my shift, I caught the bus home. I quickly ate dinner with my family, and we talked about each other's day. I really tried to interact, but my parents knew when my head was in the clouds, so they let me go off to my room as soon as I cleaned up the table. I did my chore without complaint and quickly ran up to my room. I turned my computer on and impatiently waited as it did its start up. When it was finally done loading, I opened my browser and went to Google. The page loaded and I typed, "Do not read this creepypasta," into the search bar and hit enter. But just as the results were showing, the browser closed and Paint opened. I tried to move the mouse, but I had no control anymore, as once again, blood-red letters started to appear on the screen. I watched in horror as the letters formed words, and then a sentence. Just one sentence that read, "I am you, and you are me." I tried to scream, but I couldn't. All I could manage was, "Who are you?" I said it in barely a whisper, and the screen refreshed. And again, the mouse moved on its own as it spelt out, "I am you." I shuddered and said, "Then who am I?" The words felt odd coming out of my mouth, and again the screen refreshed itself, and again it started to write. What it said horrified me, regardless of it making zero sense. It said, "You are Jeremy." Then underneath it appeared the words, "Turn around." Now I understand why the story was called Do Not Read This, because that story changes you, turns you into a vessel for that thing, a vessel for Jeremy, and you don't even have to read the story. All you have to do is click on it. And that was Do Not Read This by me. So, I'd really love to hear what you guys think. Definitely comment on this video, like it, subscribe if you want more. That would be cool too. Also, as I said at the beginning of the video, I'd like to take in your stories and read your stories and give you some airtime for that. And so, if you'd like to do that, all of the information, including the rules, the email address, and everything, are in the description to every single one of my videos. So, just this one for now. But I really hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'd like to keep doing it and get better. And would love to hear your guys' feedback on it. Anything I can change, anything that you think I can do better, I'd love to hear it, please. And thank you. And to all the rest of you Pastafarians, have a really creepy night.